Okay, at the end of the last video, I just reached a point where I'd got these fault paths laid out as they would appear in a display that was giving me the relationship between the fault paths and how they work, and I was explaining that I can't show that very easily in Windows because these would be all arranged in one column, whereas the previous fault code tables would be arranged in 4 columns, and these would be arranged in 8-bit view, and the previous ones would be arranged in 16-bit view. And so comparing them side by side would involve me not only whizzing backwards and forwards up and down in this file and trying to get you to look at one point and then going to another point and looking at that and then coming back, but also every time I did it I would have to change from 8-bit to 16-bit, so the whole thing would get mind-bogglingly complicated. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight all of these, and now you can see why I wanted them in pink, because it makes them a little bit easier to find. So I'm going to go to there and I'm just going to say copy, and then I'm going to go to Excel, and then I'm going to put that there and I'm going to say paste. Now it's already there, so I'm just pasting on top of what I'd already put there. Right, now let me explain what we're looking at on this chart so that if you want to make a chart like this you can. I've started here not because it's the right place to start, but simply because that is the point at which I ended the last video. Now to construct this Excel table or chart, whatever you want to call it, the first thing I did was just invent this number count. There is no such thing in Windows as that number count, that's me. That is the count of how many fault paths or how many code paths I think there are. So that will run from 1 to whatever number I think should be the total. And I've been saying in the previous videos, I think that is 383. So that number, as we go down, ends at 383. So there it is. And then what I did was, well, you saw what I did. I highlighted, except you saw me do this one. What I did was I arranged the P codes in there, row of 4, and then I copied them and pasted them here. So the first row is next to number 1, second row next to number 2, and such. So not rocket science, I just copied and pasted. And then I went to the VAG code block and I copied and pasted that block next to it. So this is the first row in the block of VAG codes, and I've put it right next to the first row in the block of P codes, and I've called it number 1. And then what I've also done is I've put fault path that applies to this next to it. So that's the first fault path, so presumably that first fault path goes with that block of VAG codes and that block of P codes. And now you can see this mystical number 8 that people often quote. 1, 2, 3, 4 possible codes there, 5, 6, 7, 8 possible codes in total, all feeding into that path. And so what will these codes do? Well, if one of these codes is flagged, it will be fed into this path, and 001's set of instructions will be followed as to what to do next. And those instructions will include things like, should the mill light be on, should it not be on? Is there a priority to the code? Is it a more important code than other codes? Is there a debounce time? How long should the debounce time be? Is there a healing debounce time? How long should the debounce time be? Is the healing a debounce time or is it a count? Is the error healing a debounce time or a count? So in other words, lots of things related to those errors will be fed into there. Now, this means that we have to have a fault path number here, or these won't have anything to act upon. And so if we then say to ourselves, well, what do these exactly mean? Well, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because the designers have already decided that these have a specific meaning, and I could go into that in more detail, but I won't here. But they've decided these have a specific meaning, and so any of these that feeds into a number 1, like that one there does, or that one there does, or that one, or that one, will all follow the same procedure. And of course we've got 21 there, so whatever is in these rows here will all do whatever 21 tells them to do. So they will go from finding out 21, they will go to that point and look and see what 21 is telling them to do. So the ECU is simply bouncing from one set of instructions to another. So it's gone from, here's a fault code, here's where I should go. Oh, that's now telling me to go to 11, I'll go there. And then it goes to 11, and 11 gives yet another set of instructions of what to do next. But the interesting thing is that sometimes when you look at files, you find the odd one or two of these that have got 0 next to them. Now, I've not actually gone right through all these. Now, look, oh look, there you are. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. So you've got some with 0 next to them. Now, of course, 0 could be the first fault path set of instructions. So it could start 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. But generally speaking, it doesn't. So in other words, 0 means no instructions. So no instructions for the fault path. So where does that leave us if we want a fault not to show? Well, let's have a look at some possibilities, and I've put these in on purpose, otherwise I would be again flicking backwards and forwards trying to find them. Here I've got fault code. It's 00402, which in hex would be 0402. So there's my P code there. It's in hexadecimal, as it says there, so it's 0402. The first 0 isn't read, so it would be P0402. And if I go across to here, it means that it will show up on a reader of some description, a code reader, as EGR excess flow detected. So there we go, EGR excess flow detected. Now I've called this one fault path 29, just ignore that, that's just to make life simple so we know what we're all talking about. There is no such thing as fault path 29, I'm just calling it that. But I'm calling that one fault path 29, and at the moment fault path 29 has 4 next to it. So that's the set of instructions it's going to go and follow. So if I was to type in there 1, 2, 3 noughts like that, and I'm just going to highlight that red too so we can see that that's one we've changed. If I was to change that from 4 to 0, when this code tries to function, it will have a fault path that doesn't exist, so there'll be nowhere for it to go to get any instructions, so it won't be able to carry out any instructions. So that will not be able to be flagged because there are no instructions to follow to flag. Now whatever is in this part here will have the same problem. So whatever these represent, they also will not be able to function because they are being directed to the same point and they will not know what to do. Now sometimes these appear more than once. Occasionally it will be 0402 and next to it 0402 again, so you've only got to make one change. But you can see in this file here we've got another one at 31 here. So if I want to make sure 0402 doesn't show, I need to go to that one and I need to change that one to 123 as well, and I'll just make that red. Didn't take that, so I'll go back and do it again. So I'll make that one red as well. So there we go. Now what we've got here then is a way of telling the ECU to ignore that information, because when it gets here it won't know where to go any further. So as far as it's concerned, there are no instructions what to do with that fault code. So in effect that fault code no longer exists, it just simply doesn't function. And so we can look down here and we can see that generally speaking there are others that don't function, that the designers have already left non-functioning, but of course there are no codes in them anyway. There are no codes in these, And here there are no obvious codes, and I won't go into it yet, but this table is quite complicated, the VAG code part. Some are much more simple than these. This one is really quite complicated. But this should be enough information for you to consider turning off unwanted codes. And obviously people do take off EGR valves from cars, even though in the UK you're technically not supposed to, because it's part of the emissions arrangements. But in other countries around the world, people do take EGR equipment off of cars completely, and when they do, they are likely to get fault codes. And so here we have a method of deleting those fault codes, in the sense that they will not flag, so they will not be shown. So we've just got rid of them as if they never existed. And this is quite handy, because occasionally people want to put a VW type engine, so one from the VAG group, into a completely different vehicle, and there either isn't room for some of the equipment, or they just don't want that equipment attached. And being able to make these changes allows you to go through and get rid of any codes that are being flagged up as nuisance codes that you don't want, simply because that option is not being used in your car. I get asked this a lot by people who have swapped engines, because what they've done is they've taken an engine from one car and put it into another car, but they've kept quite a lot of the bits and pieces attached from the previous car, and the wiring systems don't match up, and so they get everything working okay, but they've still got an odd few fault codes, and then they ask me, how do I get rid of them? And obviously this is one way of getting rid of them. This is not really the best way. The method used in edc16 goes to the heart of the matter. It's easier to pick out one individual code and just change the debounce times for that particular code. That's not quite so easy to do in edc16s, because the debounce codes and times for them, so the timing for that bit, is much more difficult to find. They can be found, but they're much more difficult to find, whereas this method is still quite difficult, but it's a damn sight easier than trying to find individual debounce error times and healing times. So this is the method that I would advise people to look at when they're first starting out on the idea of trying to block a fault code. Right, I hope that gives you enough information to be getting on with. I'll stop there.